Hello बच्चों, a very warm welcome to Sunya IAS. Let's start the discussion with the first set of questions. Now first set of question is around demographic transition model, always a very important model in context also of the demographic transitions that we are witnessing lately, and it has been asked multiple times, and very importantly because of the different demographic transitions like increasing longevity, then decline in the fertility rates, especially across certain countries like India. And hence, these demographic transition, they will have a huge impact in the coming decades. Maybe in form of labor force scenario, maybe in form of a general impact on the economy, etc. So I think this is an important model. And even if they don't ask you DTM model explicitly, you must include certain discussions even in the context of urbanization, even in context of migrations, etc. Okay, this is kind of a potato to be used in any of the answers. Okay, in context of the demographic transitions, not anywhere. Okay, so the question is, let's read the question carefully. The uneven economic development across different regions is reflected in the demographic transition model. Illustrate for 15 marks. So for 15 marks, you will be getting 3 pages. And my suggestion is, even if you wrap up the answer by 2.5 pages, that will be fine. But if you start learning the integration of some of the schematics and maps, then you will be able to fill up even 3 pages, but which is not a priority. Quality is a priority. Let's first of all understand the demand of the question, then I will help you make interlinkages. The uneven economic development. Now we are very clear that economic development particularly and the socio-economic development, okay, when we are talking about the broader perspective, is it even across all the regions? No, it is not. So economic development is not even. We have seen that in context of a general notion that is around the developed regions, the developing regions and underdeveloped regions, correct? And also when we are talking about one particular country, are there economic disparities? Yes. One region is more developed as compared to the another region. So there are both inter as well as intra-regional disparities, correct? So when we are talking about uneven economic development, it is demonstrated across different parameters, bachcho, right? It can be associated with the income inequalities, wage disparities. It can be in form, it can manifest, we can say, in form of the other parameters also. So I hope the term is now clear to you. Uneven economic development. Now the second part is across different regions. Across different regions, we will take up the discussion around different regions. Okay, so we will do it at the scale of, let's say at the scale of maybe continental level and even within some of the regions. So you can take the discussions around the regions like South Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, etc. is reflected in the demographic transition model. Illustrate. So how this uneven economic development is demonstrated across DTM model. Why? Because demographic transition model is a model which talks about demographic transition. So can I say that the uneven economic development is associated with the different stages of DTM model? Then we have to illustrate. How you will illustrate? You will illustrate it with the help of some examples, some case studies, bacho. Okay. So the question is asking you, uneven economic development, how it is reflected across different DTM stages. So to be more broadly, when we are talking about socio-economic development, or let's say socio-economic transition. So this is the crux of the question. That is, when we are talking about the socio-economic transitions, are they reflected across the different stages of even DTM? DTM is a model which is showcasing the different stages of demographic transition. So in the initial stages, the birth rates are quite high and the death rates are very high. And gradually we achieve a stage where the birth rates are low and the death rates are also low. So can we say that these stages also showcases to us the different stages of socio-economic transition? Yes. So let's say, for example, in a nascent stage, a country is less socio-economically developed. In that scenario, what will be happening? In that scenario, there are less exposures to high-end medical technologies. In that scenario, there are also circumstances where the death rates will be very high. The infant mortality rates will be high. And all of them will also result into higher birth rates. Bacho. So, the country is having less capacity to purchase these technologies, isn't it so? So this is in form of the economic development which is at the nascent stages. But gradually, when the economy goes through the different stages of economic transition, okay, we can understand that with the help of different models. Let's say maybe with respect to the equation with respect to Rostov. In that scenario, what will happen? Now the economic development has taken place and hence the purchasing power capacity has increased and also the economy is now maybe self-sufficient in context of technological developments. So hence the medical advancements have taken place gradually in the later stages of economic transition. And once there are the economic transitions, do they result into any impact on demography? Yes, it does. Correct? So hence gradually what will happen? That the death rates that will decline, the infant mortality rates that will decline, the maternal mortality rates that will decline. So is it leading to a decline in the birth rates and death rates? Yes. So economic transition is well reflected in the different stages of demographic transition model. Is this clear now? And we have to illustrate. So this is the crux of the demand of the question. Now let's try to understand how you would have written a good answer on this particular question, because you need some bit of additional flavoring elements so that examiner remains happy by seeing your answer. Otherwise you are in a loop कि मैडम सब कुछ आता है बट अच्छा आंसर नहीं बनता. ठीक है, उसके लिए हमें थोड़ा यहाँ वहाँ स्प्रिंकल करना होगा कुछ थिंकर्स के नेम. Okay, whenever you are writing a geography optional answer, my suggestion is have a list of the name of thinkers, and because the questions are on models, so you must have a set of summary of some models which you can interlink, right? So when we talk about population, okay, population growth and demographic transition, bachcho. So when we are talking about population growth and demographic transition, this is not a concept which has been talked only in the recent times. When we are talking about the time periods from Greeks and the Romans moving towards the medieval time periods and more recent time periods, population growth and demographic transitions have had a certain bit of reference. So, for example, Confucius talks about optimum population, because he mentions that overpopulation will lead to an impact on the resources, which can lead to environmental concerns. So hence he can be said to be the first person who talks about the concept of optimum population. Then Plato again talks about the absolute limit of population. There is a need for having a limit to the population growth, again which will have otherwise the repercussions. For example, on the consumption of the resources. For example, we are talking about the ecological limits. Then Aristotle and Polybius talks about the another concept, that is fall of the Hellenic civilization to decline in population growth. This is a contradictory viewpoint. That is, population growth is quite necessary, otherwise it leads to the fall in the civilizations bacho. Okay, and then Augustus also talks about legislation for population growth, which is complementary to this. However, very recently there were certain ideas, the concepts which talk about the population growth, which can be a challenge. So one of which was the Malthusian's idea, which proposes about the Malthusian concept in context of population growth and an impact in context of limited food resources. So Malthus is of the viewpoint, okay, we can say that this is a pessimistic viewpoint. That is, the population growth has its upper limits. Why? Because we have limited subsistence in form of food resources. And this idea was taken up by new Malthusianists. For example, Paul Ehrlich, in the context of the work Population Bomb, and some other works gradually, like Limits to Growth, etc. So these works, they talk about the implications of population growth in a negative connotation. Now when we talk about the demographic transition model, okay, because Malthus and DTM, they are important concepts, okay. So whenever we are talking about the population theories, so the idea of demographic transition is completely different from the idea proposed by Malthus. Malthus talks about population in context of food resources, whereas when we are talking about DTM, in the notion of the different stages of demographic transition, we are talking about the stages through which any given demography may go through of a particular nation. That means the fertility rates, they decline with socio-economic development. And this idea of stages is such that although the observations were made across particular countries, but they are applicable across most parts of the world. That is the idea. So here the population is not talked about in a pessimistic scenario. I hope this particular aspect is clear to you. Okay. These are some of the initial ideas which you can propose in the introduction. Now when we are talking about the DTM, demographic transition model, so proposed by Thompson and Notestein. However, they talked about the 3 stages which were later on modified, and now we are also talked about the 5th stage. So a modification in context of number of stages, but the idea remains the same. Okay, so we are also talking about the 5th stage now. So when we are talking about Thompson and Notestein, we are talking about the different stages of demographic transition. Okay, so the idea is that the decline in mortality comes before decline in fertility rates. So initially both birth rates and the death rates, they are high, but eventually what will happen in the 2nd stage, the death rates, they start declining. So hence decline in mortality, it comes before the decline in fertility rates. The fertility rates will continue to increase, okay, they will continue to be very high in the 2nd stage, but in the 3rd stage eventually, during the later 3rd stage, it will start declining, and in the 4th stage there is a complete transition. Fertility eventually declines to match mortality, that will happen gradually, which again is associated with multiple factors, which are also associated with the economic developments. So for example, when we are talking about the third stage, then we witness a certain decline in the fertility rates. Now that decline in fertility rates, can we say that is associated with the changes in the literacy rates? That is associated with also the improvement in the women empowerment, because women gradually also starts involving in the labor force. So workforce participation rates, they increase, and all of that results into a demographic transition where there is a fertility fall. So TFR rates, when you see, now those countries which are in the stage 4 moving towards stage 5, let's say, so there the TFR rates are very less. TFR rates are somewhere around 1.3, 1.2, 1.4, something like that, below the replacement levels, which will include large parts of Southeast Asia, parts of the Western Europe, some of the countries like Japan, etc. Socio-economic transformations are simultaneous, very important key term. So demographic change and socio-economic transformations are simultaneous, maybe at a different pace. Okay, so some countries, they transitioned from second stage to third stage at an early stage. They took a lesser time period, but that is possible because of the higher socio-economic developmental time periods. It is very progressive in nature. Some countries have taken a larger time period. However, that is also associated with the base size of population. So hence, the demographic transitions, they are parallel with the socio-economic transitions, which is the crux of the question. Now let's see the particular stages, and here you will illustrate it with the help of different examples. So one is the demographic transition that is happening. Okay, so population, when we see this particular graph, this is the population growth that has happened between 1615 to 2050, projected to 2050. So what you can see at a pan world level, global level, you can see that the population growth rates have also declined, Bachu. Now that is happening because globally, when we say at the pan world level, can I say that the world at a global level, okay, when we are talking about at the global level, can we say that there is a certain demographic transition? Yes. So hence the population growth rates have also declined. That is also a general economic transition that is happening. But however, you need to illustrate with the help of all the demographic transition stages: low growth, increasing growth, explosion, decreasing growth, and declining population, where there are also chances that the birth rates might be even lesser than the death rates, resulting into negative population growth. So my suggestion is, take the first stage as a separate stage, second as a separate stage, or club second and third stage, and then the fourth and fifth stage. So you can divide your answer into 3 sections here. So the first stage can be equated with some of the very primitive societies where the economic development has not taken a place. Some of the tribal regions, some part of Africa. Okay, so you can equate these regions, okay, even some tribal areas around the island regions, etc., which are in the traditional society stage. So here the conditions of economic growth, they are not parallel to the conditions of economic growth which are taking place in the second and the third stage. Then take some countries in second and third stage, largely from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, and mention how the economic growth has been more than the stage 1, okay, and which is complementarily shown in context of the decline in the fertility rates. And then fourth and fifth stage, which are witnessing even the lesser population growth rates because of the higher socio-economic developments, which are reflected across the demographic transition. So this is a graph which you cannot skip in this answer. Okay. Now when we are talking about the economic developments and a demographic transition, is DTM model alone model which talks about such a transition? No. Here when we are talking about the economic development which is not even across different regions. So hence bachon, we are also talking about certain other concepts, and these concepts how they are associated with the economic developments. So for example, urbanization and complexity in life. So complexity in life, will it lead to decline in the fecundities? Yes. So hence we talk about Spencer, and we can associate this with the fourth stage of DTM bachon. I hope you are getting the point. So urbanization, RU migration, that is associated with the third stage of Zelinsky. And in the fourth stage, there is more of urban to urban migrations, correct? So in that scenario, are we witnessing a higher proportion of population in the urban areas? Yes. And this stage is also witnessing higher economic development. And hence, this is also the stage where there are number of complexities in life. And whenever the complexities in life it increases, the fecundity it will decrease. Okay. Then higher levels of education. Whenever we are talking about the higher literacy rates, okay, and also prominently because of improvements in the literacy rates, that is shown in the higher participation rates of women in the labor force. There are other reasons why the participation of women in labor force have remained lower across certain countries like India. Okay. We will discuss it separately in some another context in another question. But for now, let's stick to this point that whenever there are increases in the literacy rates, whenever women receive higher skilling and training, and hence their labor force participation rates have improved, correct? So hence whenever their labor force participation rates improve, and in general also, whenever the education levels are improved, they are more conscious, more aware, okay, and hence because of which there are increased number of the families using the protection measures, and also these women participating in the labor force in an increased scenario. And hence what will happen? The fertility rates, they start declining. And in the highly urbanized and highly advanced economies, there is a very high proportion of females working in the labor force, and hence associated with the declining fertility rates. This also has a certain aspect of later marriages and family planning, correct? So families, they start preferring one child family and also postponing the particular marriage scenario. Now all of this has been associated also with Corrado Guinea. Okay, the socio-economic transitions along with the transition in the demography, you can associate it with the Corrado Guinea. Then women empowerment, again talked about in the context of Spencer, J.S. Mill, etc. And last but not the least aspect that you can associate in this question is in context of the social ladder. Whenever a person aspires to rise up in the social ladder, then they have a tendency to reduce their fertility rates. Okay, so their reproduction rates, they decline over a period of time. That is proposed by the concept in Arsène Dumont's social capillarity. Now all of them you can associate with the Rostov model. That is the economic transitions which are happening across different regions. That can be paralleled with the Rostov model, where we can associate it with also the demographic transitions clearly shown and parallel with the Rostov stages. Okay. Now when we talk about the global level, so uneven economic development, okay, so you can see that very clearly when we talk about certain indices like the infant mortality, okay, like the infant mortality or the birth rates. So whenever there are economic transitions, we have seen that they are paralleled with the decline in the infant mortality. Infant mortality again is high across the sub-Saharan or the South Asia. Now you must remember one of the thumb rule, that certain regions have certain characteristics with respect to demography and socio-economy. You must remember those aspects. So in case of low literacy rates, in case of high IMR, MMR, these are the regions which you can associate, that is sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So here we are witnessing high infant mortality rates. So whenever the infant mortality rates are high, can we associate it with the lack of medical technologies? Yes, and hence lesser economic development. And hence whenever the IMR rates are high, then there are chances that the fertility rates will be higher, okay, because of the patriarchal society mindset also, which prevails during these nascent stages, okay. So because of which there is a tendency that the family would want one or two male child, and hence the fertility rate in the initial stages remains high. Similarly, the birth rates are high in those areas which are socio-economically less developed. So I hope that this context is very clear to you. You can also associate it with the different population pyramids. So for example, when we talk about the population pyramids, let's see the example of Angola. So what do you see? The early stages of the demographic transition equated with the lesser economic development, whereas when we compare it with Japan, almost an inverted pyramid, highly aged population and having a very narrow base, higher in the stages of the socio-economic ladder, and also demonstrated across the demographic aspect in the population pyramid, okay. Similarly, some other countries like Niger, Guatemala, etc., they showcases the same aspect, that is the initial stages of demographic transition and equated with the socio-economic aspect. Now when we are talking about the uneven economic development etc. associated with the demographic transition. Now bachcho, towards the conclusion, you must give an interrelated aspect, let's say around the concept related with the thoughts unit. Now please understand that whenever there are demographic transition, now because this question was mainly around the theme of DTM, so whenever there are demographic transitions, can I say that in these demographic transitions, it will also impact the settlement of a region, correct? In that scenario, whenever there are modifications in the settlement of that region, can I say that the natural landscape that is now turned into cultural landscape, the idea of auto-clutter, okay, and hence you can say that yes, socio-economic transitions are very well reflected in DTM model. However, whenever there are demographic transition, it also impacts the cultural landscapes of any particular region, as proposed in the idea of cultural landscape. I hope this is clear to you. This will give an added advantage of interlinkage with the perspective unit, okay. So try to make certain interlinkages in this context